Business Unity South Africa warning that the recent implementation of Stage 6 load shedding will have a massive impact on businesses and an already fragile economy. The organization expressed its concerns around the unprotected strike and is calling for government to act more decisively with reported acts of sabotage at Eskom. Let's unpack this for you now. Bring in BUSA CEO, that's Cas Coovadia, who's with us via our video link this morning. And Cas, it's great to have you on the program around this issue, dare I add. Thanks very much for making time. You know, it was in 2018 that President Cyril Ramaphosa elected an Eskom board. That's when, before he went to Davos. In 2020, I think it was, Jabu Mabuza resigned as the Eskom board chair for various reasons, including, allegations of government being misled around what's actually happening at the utility. 2020, in the January 8th statement that was delivered in Kimberley, there was more promises made by the president that, the Eskom crisis is being dealt with seriously. And here we are in 2022, and it feels like we've actually taken a step backwards.
Yeah, so I think that I'm not too sure whether we've taken a step backwards. I think what's happened is that we just haven't addressed these issues effectively enough. Eskom is a multifaceted problem. I mean, there's a history related to that. There's our failure to actually maintain and upgrade critical infrastructure over the last couple of decades. The delays in putting up the new power plants, the problems we're having with those new power plants now, the attempt at capturing Eskom under the previous administration, remaining elements of that administration in Eskom, according to Eskom's management, that are responsible for sabotaging plants and equipment. Over and above all of that, the accumulated debt of Eskom and so on. So it's a multifaceted problem. And government has taken the decision to restructure Eskom. And the minister yesterday in his press conference indicated that board for one of the entities will be appointed by the end of July. And so we need to speed all of that up. But the critical issue right now, well, there's a couple of critical issues. The one is that if there is sabotage, if there are elements of the old administration that are still there and that are actually deliberately sabotaging Eskom, then I think we need a crack law and order and intelligence team to go into Eskom, identify who these people are, and bring them to book. We need to treat this as a crisis. We can't expect Eskom to manage that situation. Eskom is not able to manage that situation. This is a law and order issue and must be dealt with in that way. The other issue, and we've made some progress in this, and we commend government for that, is that we need to remove any remaining barriers to private sector generation of power and getting that onto the grid as quickly as possible. Because we can continue to try and sort out the problems at Eskom, but we're not going to sort out our energy issues and our power issues. And we're going to continue having load shedding to some extent if we don't actually get renewables onto the grid as quickly as possible. And so it's those sorts of stuff that we need to look at. We believe that government needs to take decisive leadership in this. Accept that we have a major crisis, and then pull in whatever resources and capacities available in the country, wherever it may be sitting. Yeah. And we all need to then put our shoulders to the wheel to try and at least manage the problem in the short term more effectively, and then deal with the medium to longer term issues. So, that's where we are, and we can point fingers at each other, but the reality is that that's where we are, and we now need to pull together to deal with this. But government needs to show decisive leadership.
I hear what you're saying, and I'm sure what you're not saying is that we shouldn't also call for accountability, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
You also speak about pulling all the resources together to ensure that we deal with this as the crisis that many describe it as. Is it time to bring in the army, perhaps, to start looking after Eskom infrastructure? Because let's be clear, the attacks coming from workers aren't actually new assaults on Eskom infrastructure. The utility has been under siege for quite some time, even from criminal elements from without.
Well, the minister was asked this question yesterday afternoon, and his response was, well, in July, when the president felt the army needed to be called in, he called them in, and it's the president's prerogative. I think it's inappropriate for me to say whether the president should call the army in. I think it's a drastic step, and he needs to consider it. But what I'm sure government is talking regularly to the Eskom management about what the issues of sabotage are, and they should be able to sit down and say what's the most effective way of dealing with it. If the most effective way of dealing with it is to bring soldiers into the plants and protect those plants, so be it. But it's not a call for us to make. We don't have the sort of information of exactly what is happening. But what we can say is that whatever is appropriate within the context of the law and our constitution must be done to deal with the sabotage.
Yeah, the question also then becomes what business does in the interim. With every passing hour without electricity, billions are lost to this country's economy.
Yeah.
And it feels like we've run out of questions around what businesses can do, if anything, to stave off these losses.
Well, look, I mean, larger businesses can obviously have generators and inverters and so on and look at ways and means of mitigating against this. Small and medium businesses do not have the wherewithal to, in many instances, mitigate against this, and they are under severe stress. But either way, the cost of goods and services goes up because of the cost of mitigating against load shedding. That in some way or other eventually gets passed on to the consumer at a time when consumers are already stretched because of rising fuel prices, food prices, and as a result of that feeling very, very stressed and pressurized. So, there isn't too much one can do in businesses. They just need to look for alternative sources of power to mitigate against load shedding, but it has an impact on the economy and it increases the price of goods and services.
Yeah, and we know which kind of businesses can survive this, right? And we also know what that means for our unemployment rate in this country when you consider which entities really can create a meaningful dent in the unemployment crisis. But let me move slightly away from that and ask you how we can prepare as a country for the next ratings agency outcome. Because we do know that typically ratings agencies also look at our precarious energy supply when determining where they should rate this country.
Well, the recent rating agencies, the reviews have been good for the country. Okay, we're still in negative territory, but we've been rating agencies have recognized some progress that has been made in getting, for instance, the next tranche of renewables on the table, in getting embedded energy going, and getting a red tape person in the president's office, and so on and so on. I think that we need to be very, very sensitive to creating an environment where rating agencies actually put us on a further negative watch, given that two of the rating agencies put us from negative onto a stable watch, although still under sub-investment grade. These sorts of issues, and even though the minister yesterday said that, Japan has some blackouts in Australia and so on, and one accepts that, the energy situation globally is volatile, but we need to look at our country. And in our country, we need to convince rating agencies, because through that we're also convincing investors that fine, we have a particular crisis here. And one, let's acknowledge we have a crisis. And the most important thing is let us publicly demonstrate that under the leadership of government, and I've got to stress this is without decisive leadership from government, none of us can move. under the leadership of government, we are pulling together to actually address the crisis. And if we can show some progress in addressing the crisis, we actually address concerns of rating agencies.
Sure. And perhaps many might say in response, perhaps that's the genesis of the crisis, a lack of leadership. Cas Coovadia, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate your insights. Cas Coovadia is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa.